everybody. We're all good. Let's get some energy in the room, but really good so far. And I am a keen motorcyclist, said here, and then move on quickly out, it says. But I would say motorcycle examiner, trainer, British Motorcycle Federation. I've probably trained about 4,000 motorcyclists in my sort of tenure. I'm passionate about bikes, old and new, and I've had some great conversations today already, and I'm still learning because lots of the conversations and the speeches I've heard so far have been fantastic. But we have a really special panel here, which I want to introduce now because it is really important that we discuss and the ongoing challenge of novice motorcyclists. And all of us as motorcyclists were novice once, and we've all been there in those moments where, inexperience leads to greater risk. Antonetta Carvello, where are you, Antonetta? Come forward, sit on the chair as I read out. Currently the Director of the Road Safety Strategy at TAC. Extensive expertise in road trauma prevention, policy, strategy, behaviour, programmes, research and evaluation. What do you do on Tuesdays? That's what I want to know. Led to the development of the road safety action plans in New South Wales and Victoria, development and adoption of best practice spanning young drivers, drink and drug driving, wouldn't recommend it, speed management and legislation, lots of things about road safety. So you're super well qualified, so well done. Where's Matt Baldock? Associate Professor Matt Baldock, come on down, please. Deputy Director of Centre of Automotive Safety Research at University of Adelaide. Has worked on road safety for over 20 years. Background of psychology and has been involved in numerous motorcycle-related research projects, including Osro's in-depth motorcycle crash study, which is based in New South Wales, and Osro's study on perceptual countermeasures for motorcycle crashes. Various studies including motorcycle clothing, very important, and licensing. Thanks, Matt, for joining us. Professor Teresa Sensoric, is that how you pronounce it? Just about. Director of Western, so we've got almost the whole of Australia covered. We've got South Australia, now we're in Western Australia. Road Safety Research at the University of Western Australia, PhD in developmental psychology of the Associated Fellow, and he moves quickly to the next page, of the Higher Education Academy, Indigenous knowledge. So particularly, I know it was mentioned earlier, and if George is still in the room, I think the vulnerability and the risks and the higher risk for those people, Indigenous people, who often are using motorcycles as really a means of transport, no other choice, can be a greater risk. So over 25 years of road safety researcher, 10 years in New South Wales, and really looking at the equity of driver and motorcycle riding, education, training and licensing. Okay, where's Sean? We've heard from Sean already. Come forward, Sean. No, we know how good he is, don't we? And fantastic. And thanks, Sean, for joining us. So I have a series of questions that, as they say in the trade, they've had no knowledge of but they've read the script and have all knowledge of it. But I want to start with you, Antonetta. Graduated licensing, we've heard, obviously about that, has been very successful in reducing trauma for young drivers. What made it so successful?
Thanks, Howard. Look, it is a big success story in road safety. I've worked in novice driver safety for many, many years, with more than 40% of people now alive and not seriously injured since 2008 in Victoria, and also we've seen those nearly half the rate of fatalities and serious injuries and in New South Wales as well. And that's fairly unprecedented. It's really hard to get those large reductions. What's made it so successful is having a really strong evidence base and understanding what are the protections we need to put in place. The fundamentals of GLS is the build-up of safer, vital experience in lower risk settings, not throwing kids into the deep end beyond their capability and maturity, okay, and still giving them access to that vital low risk experience. That's the fundamentals. Designing that for those road users is the trick with the evidence base. So a longer supervised L period, which was very controversial at the time. We accept that now. Very controlled P period. In Victoria, we actually extended the P period to 4 years. We inserted the highly restricted red P and then kept the green P for 3 years. So there were 0 BAC for 4 years. No pushback from community and kids and other novices. No peer passenger, one peer passenger only, but all based on a lot of statistical controls and evidence before we're imposing those sorts of settings on them. And lots of work around education and engagement from school right through the licensing system, extremely important. Okay, with parents and interested people.
And, transferring that scheme, which was highly successful for four-wheeled cars, but what were the challenges for motorcycles? Because it is a different world. You haven't got your mum or dad clipping you around the ear if you get it wrong as your L's when you're driving your car.
I think
you're on your own.
Yeah, that's right. Look, basically with motorcyclists, the principles for GLS are still relevant, but the exact settings need to change. They need to be more relevant to their particular challenges. So, for example, we have from day one a learner rider being actually a P-plater, really not really having any supervised Ls. I'm not saying you can do that easily on two wheels, but that is the major difference. They're thrown in the deep end. They have no physical barrier around them to protect them like car drivers when they take all the hit in a crash. They have no supervision. And they've got fairly massive access to a very diverse, challenging road network from day one. Okay, and in which you can't really survive at the speeds at which they're going if something goes wrong. So the other thing I've noticed with the learner period is a real opportunity to reduce that trauma, absolutely, and it needs to be different than car drivers. It just cannot be the same. The other difference is, I think you see this interesting pattern in New South Wales of the abrupt transition from learner to Ps and onto the full licence.
Yeah.
And really the rates of 5 or 6 times the risk is enormous still.
Yeah, we saw that. I think it was Bernard's graph, wasn't it, this morning? Saw that sort of spike every time.
Yeah, and so I think they're moving to, the data is suggesting, they're moving too abruptly through that licensing system to lower risk, to more higher risk situations too quickly before they're capable and mature.
Great. Teresa, if I could bring you in here, what elements of the driver GLS are not transferable to motorcycle licensing and why? There are some things which you can't say, well, just because it's 2 wheels, it should be the same as 4. What are those challenges?
I think Antonietta has foregrounded that well. The one thing that I see regularly is that we need long learner periods, we need supervision, we need lots of hours of training before they're on their Ps. But I have come over from Western Australia where they do, because of mimicking the car licence, graduated licensing system, they have a supervised learner period. And it's not ideal for several reasons. So again, it means you need to know someone who is a qualified long-term motorcycle licence to do any riding at all. So chances are you're not actually doing any riding if you're following the rules, if you don't know anyone. You just do your knowledge test and then you can be riding with that person. And that is a highly dangerous activity, particularly for the supervising rider. As you've seen this morning, the elements that we can forget when we're in a car is the road surface is really critical. And if you have a supervisory rider who wants to come near you, so the benefits in a car are that that person is right next to you. They see a very similar roadway. They can talk to you immediately. They can take over the controls if they really need to, and none of that applies for motorcycling. So for even a very experienced rider to have to teach someone and be trying to look at what they're doing and going to experience, as well as their own ride, with the changing surface of the road in seconds, is really risky. So we just cannot go to the same
I think
system.
anyone in the room involved in training, like I have, you have those heart-stopping moments, don't you? Whether it's in the car park trying to get someone to basically master the clutch control challenge of a motorcycle, or when you take them round the block for the first time, it is a very challenging moment. And although, with two-way radios and other things, you're still really relying on that person doing the right thing, and it is high risk.
Related to that, the wisdom that we know for a long time in drivers is people say, well, you can't just do an education program, it doesn't work. It's the opposite in motorcycling, and we have to get rid of that mentality. Education and training is essential, and it needs to happen before anyone goes on the road, and it needs to come back and keep happening, as Duncan foreshadowed. So there's a lot of parallels that we wouldn't recommend for car licences, including things like the speed restrictions and other features that aren't in the system in New South Wales as yet.
Yeah, thank you. Moving on to Matt, what educational support could be introduced to better support novice riders during that learner phase, such as learning journals or online learning or on-road coaching? What are the things, Matt, you think we should be thinking about as we move forward in the future?
Yeah, well, obviously there are a variety of modes of instruction that can be employed to impart knowledge or skills or whatever. And in reviewing a licensed training system as is occurring in New South Wales currently, it's worth looking at those different approaches. So one of the many effects that COVID had was it sort of forced a lot of training regimes to move to an online platform. And so everyone sort of got used at schools and universities to doing online training and teaching. And so there's been quite a few studies looking at whether there was a benefit or disbenefit to that. And mostly it's been found that in terms of retention of knowledge, etc., there was no disbenefit. The online training worked just as well. So that sort of suggests that maybe some online training could work with the learner phase of motorcycling. But I think we have to make sure that the mode of instruction matches the sort of skills you're trying to impart. So there are online courses for teaching you how to operate the controls of a motorcycle, but I would definitely think that you want to be with a motorcycle trainer in person, instructing you on how to do that and monitoring what you're doing. So certainly in terms of learning the controls of a motorcycle with the basic skills of riding, you definitely need to be in person. But of course, there is, there are theoretical components to teaching riding a motorcycle where online training may be an appropriate response. Now, here in Australia, I've been looking at sort of what they do overseas, and a noticeable difference, particularly when you look at some European countries, is they spend a lot longer teaching the theory of driving and the theory of riding. So you look at Germany, for example, just to get a car license, you have to do 12 lessons of theory, and then 90 minutes long. So that's 18 hours just to get a car license of theory. If you want to get a motorcycle license, it's another 4 lessons. So you're talking at 24 hours of theory before you're even learning how to control a motorcycle. In Denmark, there is a mandatory minimum number of lessons you have to do before you get your license, and it's 51. And they're 45 minutes long, and 29 of them are theory lessons. So again, that's about 20 hours of theory they're learning. In Norway, it's 17 hours of theory. So obviously in European countries, there is a lot more effort goes into teaching the theory of riding and driving. And so once you get up to those kind of hours, one would think that online might be a good approach, given the cost and the convenience of doing so. I think you've got to match your approach to the skills you're learning and also the length of time of the training you're looking to do. You mentioned learning journals. One thing that is brought into lots of skills training these days is elements of self-reflection and self-monitoring. and learning journals are probably good for that. But in terms of motorcycle riding, I would think you'd really want a third party also looking at what you're doing and giving you feedback rather than just monitoring yourself. So maybe as part of, on-road coaching or whatever, a learning journal might be useful, but I don't think it's going to be plays a major role in any new approach. And finally, on-road training. Currently in New South Wales, you can get your Ls without doing any on-road training. And in Australia, there's a bit of a mix. Some places do it, some don't. South Australia recently changed their system and they introduced on-road training. And I think there is a lot to be said for that approach. I mean, you're talking about a skill that is meant to be used on the road, and yet people are being trained to do it without it being done in the context in which those skills and those activities are taking place. So I think an on-road training component would be a really useful addition to the New South Wales scheme. But, obviously we're still going to be looking at it a little bit further and doing further consultations with jurisdictions here and overseas to build up the evidence base for whether that is indeed a good approach.
Now, Sean, we've heard a whole encyclopedia of knowledge shared with us already, and your in-depth experience is really important, especially, as an active motorcycle rider. What are the areas of novice rider education that needs more development? And what, obviously we've talked a number of elements already, but what do you think, it might look like? If you could just give us a bit of a vision of, 5 or 10 years' time, give us just a sort of summary of where you think we'll be going in that education.
Well, I can run through a few ideas, but I guess like all of us, I don't have the silver bullet answer to any of the questions, and that is part of the challenge. As you said, a couple of points have been alluded to already. In fact, I will remark on Teresa's comments about the Western Australia scheme. So across the country, for about 10 years or so since this WA schemes existed, or maybe longer, they've talked about this concept of the experienced rider. But now I'm lucky, I have done two post-licence training courses. The first one was many years ago, not long after that photo was taken. In fact, under the stewardship of Alex Jerram, who some of you will know from his time at New South Wales Ambulance, who was also the chief instructor of the Tasmania Police. But I did rider training instruction with Alex many years ago, and then I did another post-licence course. But in terms of the experienced rider, in inverted commas, I say to people these days that an untrained experienced rider is just somebody who's been making the same mistakes for a long time. So don't just assume that it's not right for a system to assume that somebody's been riding for a long time, that they're in a position to give somebody stewardship or guidance.
Yeah.
Matthew spoke about the on-road component. Now that's something, so you mentioned I lived in Tasmania until 10 years ago, and around about that time, a bit before, the Tasmania Motorcycle Council had advocated quite strongly with the Minister about, look, is this an area where we could make a difference with novice riding, about introducing an on-road component. So that has happened in Victoria and Tasmania. I guess that leads me towards, and also a point maybe from some of my earlier slides, that to get the answers and understand, the state and the boundary and working with the rules of the state structure. But I think this is a conversation we're having today, which would be a great conversation to have nationally. And I've said this to successive national ministers, it's 17 years since that last national summit, that rather than, and this is great, let's congratulate the Minister and the Department here in launching this, but rather than just New South Wales focusing on what are the missing bits and what are the right answers in rider training, let's look at this for the whole country.
Yeah, and I can speak from my own experience of being an advocate and support of rail level crossing and beating the government up to get a national campaign. I think that's a really valid point, and we definitely want to, whoever is in power in a few days' time, we definitely want to start off on the right foot and say, come on, we do need a national policy. Teresa, I want to ask you about, I know Matt's touched on it, and I've learned this, we're not unique in the world, are we? International jurisdictions use on-road coaching during their early stage of riding. Give us a few insights of how that works. I mean, I can imagine people saying, well, hang on a minute, how are we going to do this? It's going to be really expensive, and who pays for it? We haven't got the resources. Probably like they said in 84 when they were doing the review. What's your view? Because I think shearing across international boundaries doesn't mean to say anyone's better than someone else. It's just sharing that information of good experience.
Yeah, and as Duncan mentioned in the lead up as well, that to be honest, I was dragged a little bit kicking and screaming to look at developing the training and assessment for graduated motorcycle licensing system in Victoria, knowing that it was completely different from my expertise in driving. It didn't mean I had the experience and the expertise to do that, and so many people here contributed to that project. It was part of the brief to include some component on the road. At that time, no motorcycle trainers in Victoria for novices were taking people on the road at all. And so we quickly realised that for example, which you might be able to share with us, even the UK CBT system, it's a one day where you've got the theory, you do the off the road training, an assessment, and then you go on to the road all in the one day. In Victoria, we developed a 2-day program, but the training community wasn't ready to go and take people out in competency-based training and assessment because they wanted to feel that they, passed on the range test, that they could show that they did have skills before they took people on the road. It was really the community wasn't ready for that. It's not the same in New South Wales because much of the same instructors are taking people on the road for the provisional training session. So I would really strongly urge to look at having some training that goes out onto the road in the pre-learner course. The competency-based training, if people are doing these things over and over and over again on the range and they can do it, you don't need to have the test, which takes up a lot of time. We know test anxiety is a real thing, and people who are anxious and fail, it's potentially not fair, but it's not so much of a risk. But the people who haven't been able to show competency and fluke the test, they're the ones that are concerned, and then you might need to take them on the road. So think about adapting really what has been happening at the pre-provisional, doing it earlier, getting more of that into the pre-learner phase.
Great input to, I think, some really opportunities going forward. Last question, because I know I can feel Sally sort of saying, come on, Howard, well, we've got to keep to time. For all of you, and I will ask you to keep that answer sort of nice and tight, what do you think is the best way to reduce rider risk during this novice stages? What's one thing, Sean, you would tell this audience? I know there's never one thing, but I want to know it from you.
I'll give it a go. So I do wonder whether even the knowledge test, whether there's a focus upon the road rules element rather than the road craft. So I want a course that can teach people about how to be ready for that four-wheel drive coming the wrong way.
Knowledge test, right.
It's going back to Bernard's graphs with those big peaks. And we know that's what the red P in the driver licence looked really high like that, and it's just cut short. So clearly we need to get more into that first learner phase and, as Antonia mentioned, not ease off the restrictions too quickly. Keep P1. Yes, you still want a short learner to get them to come back for more training, but keep some more of the restrictions that keep them safer.
Colour down, Bernard, isn't it? Yeah, that's great. Matt, what do you think?
I agree with what Teresa just said, but I'd also add, if you're looking at the overall system, when you do studies analysing the effects of age and experience on risk, age tends to trump experience. So an older licensing age, although unpopular, would have a big benefit.
Finally.
I think all of the things that have been mentioned already, but I think a much more structured pre-L and L period. You're thrown in the deep end. It's just ridiculous. People are not ready for that. And I think there's a lot of opportunity to do that training and learning on road in a really structured way and practice under low risk conditions.
Even 2 weeks ago, I went to Austria and they had 3-dimensional, so realistic motorcycles you could ride in a simulator environment. It was like the real thing, and you could start off as a learner, or you could do those alpine passes on your BMW motorcycle at fairly fast speeds. I'm sure technology will help us move forward to a certain extent. But my view is there's nothing better than real experience in the road. And absolutely, there's some great messages there from the panel. I'd just like to thank, and would you like to thank, this wonderful panel for giving us some great guidance.